Well, until the sun actually pops over this little house next to us. It's moved so much. This is the best lighting we could do today. It'll be a little soap opera. It'll be a little soap opera-y, huh? We'll do a little ooh. It just goes on and on, huh? Still going. Thank you, Sound Bowl. Okay, I'm gonna read this again because thank you, Mark Nepo. This was a really cool, like, little imagery. The ear as petal. March 25th. The year of our Lord, March 25th. To the 2025 is the year. The year of our Lord, 2025. It's 25th of March. The ear as petal. The ear is only a petal that grows from the heart. When we hear each other, it all becomes a garden. Just what does it mean to listen? We have all exhibited the remarkable mental dividedness whereby we choose not to pay attention, and yet when asked, we can recite word for word what has been said. Listening arises from a deeper place, and it seems we can only hear the living to the extent that we have truly lived, only understand pain and joy to the extent that we have allowed ourselves to be touched by life. If the ear grows from the heart like a petal, then has roots absorb rain, then as roots absorb rain and sun until a simple flower opens, the heart must absorb both tears and joy in order to sprout an ear that can truly hear. I remember years before cutting my feet in search of a path, sitting on my immigrant grandmother's hospital bed, watching her wince as they put gauze on her bedsore heels. That's terrible. I remember years before I saved my golden retriever from drowning, watching a coworker cry for his dead dog, trying to understand how he could love an animal more than a person. I remember years before having to start my life over, racing down a farmhouse road in the middle of night to see my father-in-law's proud eyes just as the barn he built 30 years before was burning to the ground. It was only later that I felt their pain, and even more, their true joy in caring for things. Caring for things. To be sure, we do not have to experience the same things to receive each other, but we do have to experience what is ours to live through before life will show its roots. What does it take to truly listen? The breakdown of everything that parades between our hearts. If I dare to hear you, I will feel you like the sun and grow in your direction, and you in mine. For when we hear each other, it all becomes a garden. It all becomes edible. Ah, so beautiful. So beautiful. Something to ponder today besides Sense and Sensibility. We're going to listen to Jane Austen through this book today. And I'm going to get this chapter right. We're going to read chapter 16. I'll just show. That's chapter 16. Right? Yeah. So, Willoughby is the original F-boy. I mean, there's probably one before him who was a king or something, but he said, "It's not you, it's me. I love you. Please remember me like this and happy, and don't please ever touch this house." And then the next day, he was like, "I do have to go. I do actually have to go. It is not you, it is me, but I do have to be going. Had a great time, and I don't think I will accept your invitation to ever visit. But it has been fun." And Marianne is obviously devastated. Oh, here comes the sun. Doo, 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 doo. Okay, so we're going to have a chapter of soothing Marianne, I think. Chapter 16 of Sense and Sensibility. Marianne would have thought herself very inexcusable had she been able to sleep at all. the first night after parting from Willoughby. Oh, she can't even sleep. She would have been ashamed to look her family in the face the next morning, had she not risen from her bed in more need of repose than when she lay down in it. But the feelings which made such composure a disgrace left her in no danger of incurring it. She was awake the whole night, and she wept the greatest part of it. She got up with a headache, and a headache, I love that, was unable to talk, my gosh, and unwilling to take any nourishment, giving pain every moment to her mother and sisters, and forbidding all attempt at consolation from either or either. Wow. Her sensibility was potent enough. I love it when they use the words from the title in the book. Sensibility has been used a lot. She's a feeler, and this is hard for her. And I know people like that, and it is hard. When breakfast was over, she walked out by herself and wandered about the village of Allenham. She's probably going to give herself another ankle sprain. Indulging the recollection of past enjoyment and crying over the present reverse for the chief of the morning. She has all these experiences around town, and she just, everywhere she looks, there's Willoughby, and now he's gone. I did watch this video with Andrew Huberman. He said there's like this go, no-go thing. So when you love somebody and then they're gone, when you had them in your life before, you could like call them and text them and tell them things. And if you wanted to share something with them or experience something with it, it was like all these go hormones, probably, I guess. And now it's all no-go. It's like, oh, I want to call that person. Oh, they're gone. Definitely experienced that with Michael. But poor Marianne is experiences with Willoughby, and it is devastating. Absolutely devastating. The evening passes, when breakfast was over, her sensibility was put on her, she walked by herself, wondering that indulging the recollection of past enjoyment, crying over the present reverse for the chief of the morning. That's all she did all morning. Okay. The evening passed off in the equal indulgence of feeling. She played over every favourite song that she had been used to play to Willoughby, every air in which their voices had been oftenest joined, and sat at the instrument gazing on every line of music that he had written out for her. He wrote out music for her? Till her heart was so heavy that no farther sadness could be gained, and this nourishment of grief was every day applied. Wow. She spent whole hours at the pianoforte, alternately singing and crying. Oh my God. Okay. Her voice often totally suspended by her tears. In books, too, as well as in music, she courted the misery which a contrast between the past and present was certain of giving. She read nothing but what they had been used to read together. To read together? Yes. She read nothing but what they had been used to read together. It's a different language. It's a different language, but it makes sense, and I get it. Such violence of affliction. Ooh, I remember that from Pride and Prejudice. Such violence of affliction. When Mr. Collins was proposing to Elizabeth, he was like, the violence of my affliction. It's like, I don't think I've ever seen a true emotion on your face. Such violence of affliction indeed could not be supported forever. Right. It sunk within a few days into a calmer melancholy. But these employments to which she daily recurred, her solitary walks and silent meditations, still produced occasional effusions of sorrow as lively as ever. This is like describing my friend Nicole's experience with her husband. She was just had to get it out. It was kind of beautiful. She just had to get it out. And now she's kind of coming out of it. But always grief is always there. No letter from Willoughby came, and none seemed expected by Marianne. Her mother was surprised, and Eleanor again became uneasy. But Mrs. Dashwood could find explanations whenever she wanted them, which at least satisfied herself. Remember, Eleanor, said she, how very often Sir John fetches our letters himself from the post and carries them to it. We have already agreed that secrecy may be necessary, and we must acknowledge that it could not be maintained if their correspondence were to pass through Sir John's hands. Eleanor could not deny the truth of this, and she tried to find in it a motive sufficient for their silence. But there was no one method so direct, so simple, and in her opinion so eligible, of knowing the real state of the affair, and of instantly removing all mystery, that she could not help suggesting it to her mother. Why do you not ask Marianne at once, said she, whether she is or is not engaged to Willoughby? For you, her mother, and so kind, so indulgent a mother, the question could not give offence. It would be the natural result of your affection for her. She used to be all unreserved, and to you more especially, because they're so alike. Oh. I would not ask such a question for the world. Supposing it possible that they are not engaged, what distress would not such an inquiry inflict? At any rate, it would be most ungenerous. I should never deserve her confidence again, after forcing her from her confession of what it meant at present to be unacknowledged to anyone. I know Marianne's heart. I know that she dearly loves me, and that I shall not be the last to whom the affair is made known, when circumstances make the relevant revealment of it eligible. I would not attempt to force the confidence of anyone, of a child much less, because of a sense of duty would prevent the denial which her wishes might direct. Eleanor thought this generosity overstrained, considering her sister's youth, and urged the matter farther, but in vain. Common sense, common care, common prudence were all sunk in Mrs. Dashwood's romantic delicacy. Yikes. Common sense, common prudence, common care. Sunk. It was several days before Willoughby's name was mentioned before Marianne by any of her family. Sir John and Mrs. Jennings, oh, Mrs. Jennings, indeed, were not so nice. I'm sure they weren't. Their witticisms added pain to a many painful hour, but one evening Mrs. Dashwood, accidentally taking up a volume of Shakespeare, exclaimed, "We have never finished Hamlet, Marianne. Our dear Willoughby went away before we could get through it. We will put it by. Then when he comes again, but it may be months, perhaps, before that happens." "Months?" cried Marianne with strong surprise. "No, nor many weeks." Mrs. Dashwood was sorry for what she had said, but it gave Eleanor pleasure, as it produced a reply from Marianne so expressive of confidence in Willoughby and knowledge of his intentions. Yeah, Marianne knows much more than everybody has to guess and fill it in, just like with Colonel Brandon. Everybody's like, what could it possibly be? Fill in the blank. Fill in the blank is definitely the worst. What is he thinking? What could he be thinking? What do you mean what do you think he meant by this? What do you think he said this for? That's so hard. Hard place to be. One morning, about a week after his leaving the country, Marianne was prevailed on to join his sisters in their usual walk, instead of wandering away by herself. Hitherto, she had carefully avoided every companion in her rambles. If her sisters intended to walk on the downs, she directly stole away toward the lanes. Because her and Willoughby used to stay in the lanes and not the downs. Oh, I remember that. If they talked of the valley, she was as speedy in climbing the hills, and could never be found when the others set off. But at length she was secured by the exertions of Eleanor, who greatly disapproved such continual seclusion. It's not that Eleanor is not a feeling person. She just has more sense, and therefore does not let her sensibility take over. But maybe she has too much sense. Sense and sensibility, you guys. I get it. They walked along the road through the valley, and chiefly in silence, for Marianne's mind could not be controlled. Controuled. Fascinating. And Eleanor, satisfied with gaining one point, would not then attempt more. Beyond the entrance of the valley, where the country though still rich, was less wild and more open. A long stretch of the road which they had travelled on the first coming to Brighton lay before them, and on reaching that point they stopped to look around them and examine a prospect which formed the distance of their view from the cottage, from a spot which they had never happened to reach in any of their other walks before. Seeing something new, being out in nature and seeing something new. Jane Austen knows. Amongst the objects in the scene, they soon discovered an animated one. It was a man on horseback riding towards them. Oh, is it Colonel Brandon? Oh my god. In a few minutes they could distinguish him to be a gentleman, and a moment afterwards Mary Ann rapturously exclaimed, "It is he! It is indeed! I know it is!" and was hastening to meet him when Eleanor cried out, "Indeed, Mary Ann, I think you are mistaken. Your brain literally put Willoughby's face on this person. Because it needs to have something familiar. Your brain needs this to be familiar to you. Oh, God. It is not Willoughby. The person is not tall enough for him, and is not his heir. I thought it said hair. That's not the right hair. He has, cried Miriam. I am sure he has. His heir, his coat, his horse. I knew how soon he would come. God. She walked eagerly on as she spoke, and Eleanor to screen Marianne from particularity, as she felt most certain of its not being Willoughby, quickened her pace and kept up with her. Oh, God. They were soon within 30 yards of the gentleman. Marianne looked again, and her heart sunk within her obviously, and abruptly turning round, she was hurrying back when the voices of both her sisters were raised to detain her. A third, almost as well known as Willoughby, joined them in begging her to stop. And she turned round with a surprise to see and welcome Edward Ferrars, who is Fanny's brother. The stepson's wife's brother. Okay, got it. He was the only person in the world who could at the moment be forgiven for not being Willoughby. To make Eleanor happy. The only one who could have gained a smile from her, but she dispersed her tears to smile on him, and in her sister's happiness forgot for a time her own disappointment. Help others. Get out of nature, see something new, and help others. Be happy for other people. He dismounted, and giving his horse to his servant, walked back with them to Barton. Nice. Whither he was purposely coming to visit them. Wow. He was welcomed by them all with a great cordiality, but especially by Marianne, who showed more warmth of regard in her reception of him than even Eleanor herself. To Marianne, indeed, the meeting between Edward and his sister was but a continuation of that unaccountable coldness which she had often observed at Norland in their mutual behaviour. On Edward's side, more particularly, there was a deficiency of all that a lover ought to look and say on such an occasion. Oh, that's right. He was like reading some poetry. I can't remember who. And she was like, oh, God, when will it end? He was confused. Seemed scarcely sensible of pleasure in seeing them. Looked neither rapturous nor gay, said little but was forced from him by question, and distinguished Eleanor by no mark of affection. Marianne saw and listened with increasing surprise. Ooh, spelled with a Z. Like there's a prize. That's cool. That's not how we spell it, is it? Vocab word for the day. She began almost to feel a dislike of Edward, because he's so opposite of Willoughby. And it ended, as every feeling must end with her, by carrying back her thoughts to Willoughby, whose manners formed a contrast sufficiently striking to those of his brother elect. What? Striking to those of his brother elect. Willoughby. Edward. Okay. After a short silence, which succeeded the first surprise and inquiries of meeting, Marianne asked Edward if he came directly from London. No, he had been in Devonshire. A fortnight. A fortnight, she repeated, surprised at his being so long in the same country with Eleanor without seeing her before. He looked rather distressed as he added that he had been staying with some friends near Plymouth. Have you been lately to Sussex? Said Eleanor. I was at Norland about a month ago. And no. And how does dear Norland look? Cried Marianne. Dear Norland, said Eleanor, probably looks much as it always does at this time of year, the woods and walks thickly covered with dead leaves. Oh, cried Marianne, with what transporting sensations have I formerly seen them for? How have I delighted, as I walked, to see them driven in showers about me by the wind. What feelings have they, the season, the air altogether inspired? Now there is no one to regard them. They are seen only as nuisance, swept hastily off and driven as much as possible from sight. It is not everyone, said Eleanor, who has your passion for dead leaves. Great casting. I can absolutely see Emma Thompson for dead leaves. I can see her saying that. No, my feelings are not often shared, not often understood, but sometimes they are. As she said this, she sunk into a reverie for a few moments, but roused herself again. Now, Edward, said she, calling his attention to the prospect. Here is Barton Valley. Look up it, and be tranquil if you can. Look at those hills. Did you ever see their equals? To the left is Barton Park, amongst those woods and plantations. You may see one end of the house. And there beneath the farthest hill, which rises with such grandeur, is our cottage. It is a beautiful country, he replied, but these bottoms must be dirty in water. There's a little 2 next to the word bottoms, which I think is really funny. Low-lying land, an alluvial hollow. Alluvial hollow. Something, dead leaves, your passion equals, the bottoms must be dirty in water. How can you think of dirt with such objects before you? Yeah, he's... Because, replied he, smiling, among the rest of the objects before me, I see a very dirty lane. How strange, said Marianne to herself as she walked on. Have you an agreeable neighborhood here? Are the Middletons pleasant people? No, not at all, answered Marianne. We could not be more unfortunately situated. Marianne, cried her sister, how can you say so? How can you be so unjust? They are very respectable family, Mr. Ferrars, and towards us have behaved in the friendliest manner. Have you forgot, Marianne, how many pleasant days we have owed to them? No, said Marianne in a low voice, nor how many painful moments. Oh, yikes. Eleanor took notice of this, and directing her attention to their visitor, endeavoured to support something like discourse with him by talking of their present residence, its conveniences, and, with a little C and a dot next to it, which I don't know what that means, escorting him occasionally questions and remarks, extorting from him occasional questions and remarks. His coldness and reserve mortified her severely. She was vexed and half angry, but resolving to regulate her behaviour to him by the past rather than the present, she avoided every appearance of resentment or displeasure, and treated him as though she thought he ought to be treated from the family connection. Wow, I love that she said the word regulate. Resolving to regulate her behavior. Jane Austen was smart. She's smart. Okay, chapter 17. Let's continue on, shall we? You find. Whoa, look at that. Look at that. Whoa, it's so sunny. Okay, we'll be somewhere in the middle. Okay. Mrs. Dashwood was surprised for a moment at seeing him. His coming to Barton was, in her opinion, of all things the most natural. Her joy and expressions of regard long outlived her wonder. He received the kindest welcome from her, and shyness, coldness, reserve could not stand against such a reception. They had begun to fail him before he entered the house, and they were quite overcome by the captivating manners of Mrs. Dashwood. Indeed, a man could not very well be in love with either of her daughters without extending the passion to her. That's sweet. She's like so polite and nice and good-mannered that people are like, well, yeah, I mean, you have a great mom. And Eleanor had the satisfaction of seeing him soon become more like himself. Yeah, he's just shy at first. Very Mr. Darcy energy right now. His affection seemed to reanimate towards them all, and his interest in their welfare again became perceptible. That's nice. He was not in spirits, however. He praised the house, admired its prospects, was attentive and kind, but still he was not in spirits. The whole family perceived it, and Mrs. Dashwood, attributing it to some want of liberality in his mother, sat down to table indignant against all selfish parents. Is Edward Ferrars... No. What are Mrs. Ferrars' views for you at present, Edward? Said she, when dinner was over and they had drawn round the fire. Are you still to be a great orator in spite of yourself? No, I hope my mother is now convinced that I have no more talents than inclination for a public life. But how is your fame to be established? For famous you must be to satisfy all your family. And with no inclination for expense, no affection for strangers, no profession, and no assurance, you may find it a difficult matter. I shall not attempt it. I have no wish to be distinguished, and I have every reason to hope I never shall. Thank heaven, I cannot be forced into genius or eloquence. You have no ambition, I well know. Your wishes are all moderate. As moderate as those of the rest of the world, I believe. I wish, as well as everybody else, to be perfectly happy, but like everybody else, it must be in my own way. Greatness will not make me so. Wow. Strange if it would, cried Marianne. What have wealth or grandeur to do with happiness? Grandeur has but a little, said Eleanor, but wealth has much to do with it. Not if you ask the Beatles. Eleanor, for shame, said Marianne. Money can only give you happiness where there is nothing else to give it. Beyond a competence, yes. It can afford no real satisfaction, as far as mere self is concerned. Perhaps, said Eleanor, smiling, we may come to the same point. Your competence and my wealth are very much alike, I dare say, and without them, as the world goes on, we shall both agree that every kind of external comfort must be wanting. Your ideas are only more noble than mine. Come, what is your competence? About 1,800 or 2,000 a year, not more than that. Eleanor laughed. 2,000 a year? 1 is my wealth. I guessed how it would end. And yet 2,000 a year is very moderate income, said Marianne. A family cannot be well maintained on a smaller. I am sure I am not extravagant in my demands. A proper establishment of servants, a carriage, and perhaps 2, and hunters cannot be supported on less. Eleanor smiled again to hear sister describing so accurately their future expenses at Comagna. Hunters, repeated Edward. But why must you have hunters? Everybody does not hunt. Marianne coloured as she replied, but most people do. I wish, said Margaret, striking out a novel thought, that somebody would give us a large fortune apiece. That somebody would give us all a large fortune apiece. Yeah, that's my wish too, Margaret. Oh, that they would, cried Marianne, her eyes sparkling with animation and her cheeks glowing with delight of such imaginary happiness. We are all unanimous in that wish, I suppose, said Eleanor, in spite of the insufficiency of wealth. Oh, dear, cried Margaret, how happy I should be. I wonder what I should do with it. Marianne looked as if she had no doubt on that point. I should be puzzled to spend a large fortune myself. I should be puzzled to spend a large fortune myself, said Mrs. Dashwood, if my children were all to be rich without my help. You must begin your improvements on this house, observed Eleanor, and your difficulties will soon vanish. What magnificent orders would travel from this family to London, said Edward, in such an event. What a happy day for booksellers, music sellers, and print shops. You, Miss Dashwood, would give a general commission for every new print of merit to be sent you. And as for Marianne, I know her greatness of soul. There would not be music enough in London to content her, and books, Thomson, Cowper, Scott, she would buy them all over and over again. She would buy up every copy, I believe, to prevent their falling into unworthy hands. and she would have every book that tells her how to admire an old twisted tree. Should you not, Marianne? Forgive if I am very saucy. You're being saucy. But I was willing to show you that I had not forgot our old disputes. I love to be reminded of the past, Edward. Whether it be melancholy or gay, I love to recall it. And you will never offend me by talking of former times. You are very right in supposing how my money would be spent. Some of it at least. My loose cash would certainly be employed in improving my collection of music and books. And the bulk of your fortune would be laid out in annuities on the authors of their heirs. No, Edward, I should have something else to do with it. Perhaps then you would bestow it as a reward on the person who wrote the ablest defense of your favorite maxim, that no one can ever be in love more than once in their life, for your opinion on that point is unchanged, I presume. Oh, yeah, she believes that nobody can be in love more than once, so she, busted her little love waddle on Willoughby. I guess that's the problem with that. Undoubtedly. At my time of life, opinions are tolerably fixed. It is not likely that I should now see or hear anything to change them. Marianne is as steadfast as ever, you see, said Eleanor. She is not at all altered. She is only growing a little more grave than she was. Nay, Edward, said Marianne, you need not reproach me. You are not very gay yourself. Why should you think so? Replied he with a sigh. But gaiety never was a part of my character. Nor do I think it a part of Marianne, said Eleanor. I should hardly call her a lively girl. She is very earnest, very eager in all she does, sometimes talks a great deal, and always with animation, but she is not often really merry. I believe you're right, he replied, and yet I've always set her down as a lively girl. I frequently detect myself in such kinds of mistakes, said Eleanor, in a total misapprehension of character in some point or other, fancying people so much more gay or grave, or ingenious or stupid than they really are. I can hardly tell why, or in what the deception originated. Sometimes one is guided by what they say of themselves, and very frequently by what other people say of them, without giving oneself time to deliberate and judge. So smart. Wow. But I thought it was right, Eleanor, said Marianne, to be guided wholly by the opinion of other people. I thought our judgments were given us merely to be subservient to those of our neighbours. This has always been your doctrine, I am sure. No, Marianne, never. My doctrine has never aimed at the subjection of the understanding. All I have ever attempted to influence has been the behaviour. You must not confound my meaning. I am guilty, I confess, of having often wished you to treat our acquaintance in general with greater attention, but when have I advised you to adopt their sentiments or conform to their judgment in serious matters? You have not yet been able to bring your sister over to your plan of general civility, said Edward to Eleanor. Do you gain no ground? Quite the contrary, replied Eleanor, looking expressively at Marianne. My judgment, he returned, is all on your side of the question, but I'm afraid my practice is much more on your sister's. I never wish to offend, but I am so foolishly shy that I often seem negligent, when I am only kept back by my natural awkwardness. A-U-K, awkwardness, cute. I have frequently thought that I must been intended by nature to be fond of low company. I am so little at ease among strangers of gentility. Same. Marianne has not shyness to excuse any inattention of hers, said Eleanor. She knows her own worth too well for false shame, replied Edward. Shyness is only the effect of a sense of inferiority in some way or another. If I could persuade myself that my manners were perfectly easy and graceful, I should not be shy. But you would still be reserved, said Marianne, and that is worse. Edward started. Reserved? Am I reserved, Marianne? Yes, very. I do not understand you, replied he, colouring. Reserved? How? In what manner? What am I to tell you? Can you suppose? Eleanor looked surprised at his emotions, but trying to laugh off the subject, she said to him, Do not you know my sister well enough to understand what she means? Do not you know that she calls everyone reserved who does not talk as fast and as admire what she admires as rapturously as herself? Edward made no answer. His gravity and thoughtfulness returned on him in their fullest extent, and he sat for some time silent and dull. Wow. This seems like a heavy conversation. I think I'm gonna look up this chapter and like try to dive deeper into it. I feel like it's like very telling of the times and these people and what they feel. Like you should be, yeah, the whole idea of like, I thought we all just learned how to behave by listening to other people. We're making slow but steady little dents in this little book. So happy to read to you all. Happy reading whatever you're working on. Happy reading. Love yourself. Take your time for yourself today, babes. And happy reading. Ta-ta.